Mira Hollow was a town of whispers, and none were louder than the ones about the Blackwood House. The mansion, a towering Victorian structure draped in ivy and decay, had stood at the edge of town for over a century. No one had lived there in decades, not since the Blackwood family vanished without a trace. 15-year-old Daniel Carter had heard the rumors all his life. Some said the house was cursed, others claimed it was alive. But Daniel wasn't one to believe in ghost stories, so when his friends dared him to spend a night inside, he didn't hesitate. "Piece of cake," he smirked. Armed with only a flashlight and his phone, Daniel climbed the rusted gate and stepped onto the overgrown path. The house loomed ahead, its windows like black, empty eyes. The front door, warped with time, creaked open at his touch. The air inside was thick and musty, carrying the scent of rotting wood and something else, something metallic. He shivered, but pushed forward. The grand foyer was frozen in time. A chandelier covered in cobwebs hung from the ceiling. Portraits of the long-gone Blackwood family lined the walls. Their faces faded, but their eyes seemed to follow him. Ignoring the chill creeping up his spine, Daniel moved deeper into the house. He found an old study, its shelves lined with dusty books. A grand piano sat untouched in the corner, its keys yellowed with age. Daniel ran a finger over the surface, leaving a streak in the dust. Then he heard it. A whisper, software indistinct. He spun around, his flashlight flickering. "Hello?" His voice echoed through the empty hall. Silence. His pulse quickened, but he shook it off. "It's just my mind playing tricks on me." Then the whisper came again, louder, closer. Daniel turned just in time to see a shadow dart across the hallway. His breath hitched. It wasn't just a trick of the light. Something was in here with him. He rushed back toward the front door, but it was no longer there. In its place stood a solid wall of aged wood. Daniel's heart pounded. He was trapped. The whisper turned into a chorus, dozens of voices murmuring at once. Some sounded like children, others like something inhuman. Then the footsteps started, soft at first, then growing louder, closer. Daniel backed away, his flashlight beam shaking. The air around him grew colder, his breath coming out in white puffs. A low, guttural voice spoke. "You shouldn't have come." Daniel turned, and his blood ran cold. A figure stood in the darkness, barely human. Its form flickered, shifting between solid and shadow. Hollow eyes bore into him, filled with something ancient and hungry. He stumbled back, crashing into a table. The old piano played a discordant note by itself. The portraits on the walls twisted, smiling. Daniel bolted. He ran blindly through the corridors, but the house had changed. Hallways stretched endlessly, rooms twisted into places that didn't exist before. The house was alive, and it wasn't letting him go. Daniel didn't know how long he ran, how many doors he threw open only to find brick walls. His phone was dead. His flashlight flickered its last breath. Then he saw it, a staircase leading down. With no other choice, he descended. The basement was worse. The walls pulsed as if breathing, the shadows creeping along the floor like liquid. In the center of the room stood a circle of old wooden chairs, and in each chair sat a figure, lifeless, still. The Blackwood family. Daniel clamped a hand over his mouth to stifle a scream. Their skin was grey, their faces frozen in twisted agony. Their eyes, deep, sunken pits, seemed to stare right through him. Behind him the whispering grew deafening. A hand, cold and bony, clamped onto his shoulder. Daniel screamed. The world went black. The next morning, Daniel's friends waited outside the gate, laughing about how he'd probably chickened out and left early. But when the sun rose high and Daniel still hadn't appeared, their laughter faded. They called his phone. No answer. They called his parents. He hadn't come home. When the police searched the house, they found nothing, no footprints, no signs of entry. But in the basement, they found 13 old chairs, and now one of them wasn't empty.